Hello, friends. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Here, I share a brand new story every day. If you enjoy my videos, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's dive into today's story. My pre-university college in New York had a dark and mysterious past that no one seemed to know the full story of. When I joined the hostel, I was excited to gain some freedom from my parents. Being the youngest in the family, I was a pampered child, and the hostel was only 15 kilometers away from home, so my parents wouldn't miss me too much. The first day at college felt like I had grown wings and was ready to fly. However, the second day turned out to be a nightmare. Although I didn't always enjoy being at home, I found myself missing my parents deeply. Around 1 a.m., I stepped out of my hostel room, tears streaming down my face. To my surprise, my friend also emerged, equally distressed. We comforted each other and talked about the ups and downs of life until time slipped away. It was 2:30 a.m. when my friend mentioned she needed to use the washroom and asked me to accompany her. We had common washrooms, so I waited outside. Within seconds, my friend screamed and rushed out, clutching me tightly. She insisted we leave immediately, her voice trembling as she repeated, "Blood and hair." I was confused and urged her to stay put while I investigated. Opening the door to the first washroom, I saw it was clean. But when I opened the third door, my heart nearly stopped. The washroom was covered in blood, and there was a bunch of long hair scattered around as if someone had cut it in a fit of rage. I bolted out of the washroom and saw a crowd gathering around my friend, trying to console her. We hurried to the floor warden and told her what we had seen. She seemed tense and quickly went to the main hostel in charge. After a brief discussion, the in charge sent everyone back to their rooms and asked us to stay in her room for the night. My friend was so terrified that she developed a fever and eventually went home, never to return to the college. A few days later, some seniors approached me, curious about what had happened. I recounted the entire incident, and they asked me to come to their hostel block that night. Our college had 2 blocks, one for seniors and one for juniors. Around 9 p.m., I headed to the senior block, passing a large tree and a single room beside it, locked with various pujas. The room number was 23, which struck me as odd since I'd always heard 13 was the unlucky number. A senior guided me to the block, where I was met with a solemn atmosphere. The seniors explained that what had happened to my friend and me was no joke. They asked if we had eaten non-vegetarian food that day, which we had, brought by my visiting parents. The seniors warned me that bringing outside food was against hostel rules and could attract trouble. They also advised me to stay away from the room near the tree. As I left the senior block early the next morning, I encountered a commotion. A girl stood with deep scars on her face and hands, her parents arguing with the hostel in charge. The in-charge sent everyone away, telling the parents, "I'm sorry, there is one, and it will do its work. It harmed your daughter, so better leave the college." This chilling statement sent shivers down our spines. That same day, my parents visited again and brought chicken. I told them it wasn't allowed, but my dad insisted, saying, "Be adventurous." Reluctantly, I took the food back to the hostel. That night, after study hours, my roommates and I sat on the top bunk beds talking about the morning's events and sharing spiritual stories. We talked until 3 a.m., trying to stay awake out of fear. Suddenly, my friend woke me up, pointing out that the fan above us was on, even though we had turned it off. We heard strange noises and remembered the chicken. Too scared to move, we clung to each other until morning. When we finally got down, we found chicken bones scattered around the room. We were petrified. I confided in my zoology teacher, who was like a father to me. Tragically, he passed away a week later, and his sudden death added to the mystery of the hostel. I often wonder if sharing the story with him had anything to do with it. I still regret it and miss him dearly. There were many other incidents in the hostel, leading to several teachers and wardens leaving. Eventually, our college was moved to a new building after 6 months. Despite the terror, those 6 months were thrilling and unforgettable, although losing people made it bittersweet. I don't think it's the most disturbing story, but it remains the scariest experience I've ever had. I remember it as if it were yesterday. My popularity was peaking during 7th grade, and as I transitioned into the role of class monitor the following year, I was feeling adventurous and eager to explore new experiences. It was August, and my friends and I were discussing spooky stories when a classmate mentioned a supposedly haunted house in Manhattan that I had never heard of before. Skeptical by nature and a staunch believer in Hanumanji, I dismissed it as mere superstition. That evening, after school, I went home to start my homework. The haunted house story kept replaying in my mind, gnawing at my curiosity. Unable to resist, I called my friend to learn more. The next day, a Saturday, we met up at school. He described the house's location. It was near a commercial building I was familiar with, but didn't know it was rumored to be haunted. Despite his reluctance, I managed to convince him to join me in investigating the place on Sunday. We arrived at the house at noon. From the outside, it looked like an old, dilapidated structure with overgrown weeds and broken windows. It wasn't particularly frightening at first glance, but the eerie silence and thick layer of dust hinted at years of abandonment. I approached the gate and opened it, my friend hesitating behind me. "We shouldn't go inside," he warned, his voice tinged with unease. Ignoring his protests, I pushed open the heavy main door and stepped into the dark hallway. "Look, no one's here," I said, attempting to reassure him. I turned on the light, revealing a cluttered interior that only fueled my curiosity further. My friend, visibly nervous, pleaded, "Let's just leave." I insisted we explore a bit before making a decision. "It'll be fine," I said. I found an old couch and sat down, pulling an apple from my pocket. I thought it would be a boring adventure, so I brought a snack along. My friend, however, remained on edge. Suddenly, with a loud creak, the main door slammed shut behind us. My friend screamed, running frantically around the house, clearly terrified. I tried to calm him, dismissing his fears as a result of a draft. "Let's just go upstairs and see what's there," I suggested, trying to keep our investigation on track. Reluctantly, he agreed, and we climbed the creaky stairs to the second floor. I encouraged him to check one of the rooms. He entered cautiously, and moments later bolted out screaming, "Ghost! There's a ghost inside! We need to get out now!" His terror was palpable, and for the first time I felt a real shiver of fear. "Did you really see a ghost?" I asked, trying to make sense of his panic. "You think you'll be safe if we leave?" I grabbed a sturdy rod from a nearby corner. "Let's face it together," I said, trying to muster up some bravery. We approached the room he had seen the ghost in. Inside, it was dark and musty. I swung the rod around, more out of anxiety than purpose. Suddenly, it hit something solid. We both screamed as the rod shattered a window, letting in streams of light. We waited outside the room, hearts pounding, expecting the ghost to emerge. After about 15 minutes of tense waiting, we ventured back inside. With the light streaming through the broken window, we were finally able to see clearly. To our astonishment, the ghost was nothing more than a fake skeleton lying on the floor. It was a gruesome but clearly staged prop, likely left behind by a former occupant who had been a doctor. "Look at that, your ghost!" I said, trying to laugh off our fright. We left the house, chuckling at our overreaction. But the experience was far from ordinary. As we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about that place was still unsettling. Over the following weeks, rumors about the house spread among students. Stories emerged about strange noises and flickering lights. I later learned that the house had once been a clinic that shut down under mysterious circumstances. Some claimed that it had been a site of tragic events, leading to the local legend of the haunted house. Despite the revelations and the return to normalcy, the experience left a lasting impression on me. It was a vivid reminder that not everything is as it seems, and that sometimes the most unsettling experiences come from the unknown. The summer of my 12th year in New York City was marked by an unsettling incident that would stay with me for years. Our apartment was situated on the third floor of a towering, older building in the heart of the city. The building was a relic from a bygone era, its creaking floors and narrow corridors a constant reminder of its age. We had become accustomed to the frequent power outages that plagued the area during the hot, sticky nights. When the electricity failed, our home would be plunged in darkness, the oppressive heat only adding to the discomfort. On those nights, we often took refuge on our balcony, a long, narrow space that stretched from our living room to the front door of the apartment. It was on one such balmy summer night that the strange events began. The power had gone out as usual, and the city was enveloped in a shroud of darkness. My father and I decided to set up our sleeping bags on the balcony, hoping for a breeze to alleviate the heat. My mother and younger brother, who were always more sensitive to the heat, opted to stay inside the apartment, trying to find comfort in the dim glow of candlelight and battery-powered fans. The balcony, with its view of the cityscape, had always been a place of solace. The sounds of distant traffic and the occasional chirping of night birds created a calming atmosphere. That night, however, the usual serenity was disrupted. As I drifted off to sleep, lulled by the gentle sway of the breeze, an unsettling noise pierced the quiet, a loud, guttural scream that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I awoke with a start, my heart racing. The scream was so abrupt, so visceral, that it took me a moment to process what I had heard. I glanced over at my father, who was still asleep, his chest rising and falling rhythmically. A shiver ran down my spine as I struggled to understand the source of the sound. It was as though the scream had come from somewhere within the apartment complex itself, reverberating through the walls and floorboards. I tried to wake my father, but a strange paralysis gripped me. I felt an inexplicable fear, a sense that something terrible was unfolding, but I couldn't move. I lay still, my mind racing as the screams continued. They seemed to ebb and flow, growing closer and then retreating, as if someone was running up and down the corridor outside. As the hours passed, the screams continued unabated. Each cry for help was more desperate than the last, a chilling soundtrack to my sleepless night. I couldn't tell if the sound was moving closer or further away. It seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. My attempts to rationalize the noise as a figment of my imagination or a bad dream were in vain. The screams were too real, too horrifying to ignore. When morning finally arrived, the noise ceased with the dawn. I felt a profound sense of relief as the first light of day crept over the horizon, dispelling the darkness and the fear that had consumed me. My mother and brother eventually joined us on the balcony, and I hesitated to mention the night's events. The city below was quiet, and there was no indication of any disturbance or incident. I chose to keep the experience to myself, unsure of how to explain it. The following days were filled with a sense of unease. The screams of that night haunted me, replaying in my mind like a broken record. I eventually confided in my younger brother, hoping he might remember something that could explain the strange events. To my dismay, he couldn't recall anything unusual. According to him, if there had been no news of an incident, it was likely just a product of my imagination or a result of being half asleep. As I grew older, the memory of that night remained vivid, a haunting reminder of something I couldn't quite understand. The screams were real, but their source remained a mystery. Was it a figment of my imagination, or was there something truly sinister unfolding just outside our apartment? In the years that followed, the incident remained an unanswered question, a dark shadow on my childhood memories. The summer nights in that old apartment took on a new significance, the balcony now a place where fear and curiosity mingled. The mystery of that night left me with a lingering sense of dread, a reminder of the thin line between reality and imagination. I never expected this story to resonate with so many. Writing about it brought back those unsettling feelings, and I'm grateful for the support and interest. The mystery of that night remains unsolved, leaving me with more questions than answers. For as long as I can remember, sleep has never been a sanctuary for me. From the tender age of 5, I have been tormented by sleep paralysis, a phenomenon where the mind awakens, but the body remains frozen, trapped in a state of limbo between dreams and reality. This cruel affliction plagued me every night without fail. I grew up in the quiet town of Willow Creek, nestled deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Our house, an old Victorian mansion, had been in the family for generations. Its creaking floorboards and whispering walls held stories of their own, but none were as terrifying as the one I am about to share. In Willow Creek, tales of the supernatural were common, and everyone had their own version of a ghost story. But for me, the horror was personal and unrelenting. My family followed an ancient tradition that blended elements of Christianity with local folklore. I often heard that sleep paralysis was caused by malevolent spirits or demons lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce on their unsuspecting prey. Every night, as I lay in bed beside my mother, I would pray fervently for protection. My prayers were a mix of ancient incantations and personal pleas, a desperate attempt to ward off the darkness that awaited me. Despite my fear, I would often challenge the unseen entity, invoking the name of Saint Michael, the archangel, to shield me from harm. The dreams always began the same way. As I drifted off to sleep, a kaleidoscope of colors would burst into my mind, swirling and twisting until they formed a grotesque rainbow. Then I would feel an invisible force pulling me downward, as if I were being sucked into the very bowels of the earth. The descent was rapid and terrifying, and I would land in the gnarled hands of a witch, her eyes gleaming with malevolence. The witch, a nightmarish figure, draped in tattered black robes, would drag me to a jagged rock altar deep in a shadowy forest. She would chant in an ancient, guttural language, her voice resonating with dark power. Despite the fear gripping my heart, I would find myself dressed like a medieval princess, a stark contrast to the horror surrounding me. The witch's bony fingers would trace intricate patterns on my skin as she performed her dark rituals. One night, the dream altered slightly. Instead of landing immediately in the witch's grasp, I found myself in a dark, twisted forest. The trees seemed to move, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Shadows danced around me, whispering my name. Each step I took echoed in the silence, amplifying the sense of dread that gripped me. As I ventured deeper into the forest, I stumbled upon a clearing where the witch awaited me. Her eyes gleamed with a sinister light, and the ground beneath her seemed to pulsate with dark energy. She extended her hand, and I felt an invisible force compelling me to approach her. "You cannot escape," she hissed, her voice sending shivers down my spine. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were encased in cement. Summoning all my courage, I shouted, "Saint Michael, protect me!" The forest echoed with my plea, and the witch recoiled, her grip on me loosening. Tashar. On another night, the dream took me to a place I had never seen before, a realm of mirrors. Everywhere I looked, there were reflections of myself, distorted and twisted. The air was thick with an eerie silence, and my own reflection seemed to mock me. The witch appeared in one of the mirrors, her face contorted into a sinister grin. "Your fears will consume you," she taunted. Each mirror showed a different version of me, some crying, some screaming, and others standing in silent terror. The witch's voice grew louder, reverberating through the mirror realm. Desperate to break free, I closed my eyes and began to chant, "Saint Michael, protect me!" When I opened my eyes, the mirrors shattered, and I found myself back in the familiar dark forest, but the witch's presence was weaker. One particularly harrowing night, I found myself in an endless corridor, its walls lined with ancient, flickering torches. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, and each step I took felt like walking through quicksand. The witch's laughter echoed through the corridor, growing louder and more menacing with each step. I saw doors lining the corridor, each marked with strange symbols. I tried opening one, but it led to another identical corridor. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped in an infinite maze. The witch's laughter grew louder, filling the air with a sense of impending doom. As despair threatened to overwhelm me, I fell to my knees and prayed with all my might, "Saint Michael, protect me!" A brilliant light pierced through the darkness, and the corridor began to collapse. The walls crumbled, revealing the night sky above. I woke up with a start, my heart racing, but relieved to be free from the nightmare's grip. The climax of my ordeal came on a stormy night. Thunder rumbled in the distance as I drifted into sleep. This time, I found myself in a desolate wasteland, the sky dark and ominous. The witch stood before me, more powerful and terrifying than ever. "You cannot escape me," she snarled, her eyes burning with hatred. She raised her hands, and the ground beneath me trembled. Dark tendrils of energy snaked towards me, threatening to engulf me. For the first time, I felt truly powerless. But then, a blinding light erupted from the heavens, illuminating the wasteland. Saint Michael descended, his fiery sword held high. With a single powerful strike, he banished the witch into oblivion. The light grew brighter, engulfing everything in its radiance. I felt a warmth and peace I had never known before. The dream shattered, and I awoke to the sound of rain tapping against my window. The nightmares had finally ended. From that night on, the witch never returned, and I slept peacefully for the first time in years. I still live in Willow Creek, and the old Victorian mansion remains as eerie as ever. But now, it holds no fear for me. I know that, no matter what darkness may come, I am protected by a force greater than any evil that lurks in the shadows. I've heard this story from multiple friends, but the most unsettling version comes from a close friend of mine who experienced it firsthand. Her encounter happened on a late-night train ride in Mumbai, and it's a tale that still sends shivers down her spine. It was just past midnight, and she was traveling alone on a nearly empty local train. The compartment was dimly lit, with only a few passengers scattered around. She noticed a man seated in a corner, and 3 women clad in burqas sitting further down the car. The atmosphere was quiet and tense, with the rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks the only sound breaking the silence. As the train rumbled through the darkened city, the man in the corner got up and moved closer to my friend. He approached her cautiously, but with a sense of urgency. Leaning in, he whispered, "Please, get off with me at the next station. Don't ask any questions." His tone was insistent yet anxious, and his sudden closeness made her uneasy. It was already late, and the thought of getting off the train with a stranger in such a situation was frightening. Despite her growing apprehension, she decided not to listen. The train pulled into the next station, and she stayed put. The man, now visibly agitated, continued to plead with her, his eyes darting nervously between her and the other passengers. He was adamant, almost desperate, but she still didn't move. When the train was about to leave the station, he gave up, cursing under his breath, and headed towards the train door. As he was about to disembark, something made her follow him, her fear and curiosity driving her. She stepped off the train 2 stations before her intended stop, feeling a mix of dread and confusion. As soon as they were on the platform, the man broke into a run, and her fear escalated into a frantic panic. She chased after him, demanding to know why he was running. He only urged her to keep moving, promising he would explain everything once they were safe. Once they were at a sufficient distance, he finally slowed down and caught his breath. His face was pale, and he spoke quickly. "Do you remember the 3 women in burqas? The one in the middle looked sleepy, didn't she? She wasn't sleepy. She was dead. I saw blood dripping from her hand. And those women weren't even women. They were men in disguise. The other 2 were killers who planned to dispose of the body in the river between the next 2 stations. If you had stayed on the train, you would have been a witness to the murder, and they would have killed you too." Her mind raced as the gravity of his words sank in. The fear that had gripped her now turned into a deep, chilling realization. The man's warning was both terrifying and life-saving. The train ride she thought was an ordinary journey had turned into a nightmare. In the days following the incident, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered. The thought of what might have happened if she had ignored the man's warnings haunted her. The incident became a dark chapter in her memory, a reminder of how quickly danger can escalate and how one seemingly innocuous decision can lead to life-threatening consequences. It's a story that remains etched in her mind and serves as a stark reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk in even the most routine parts of our lives. The Haunted Ventriloquist Doll. In the 1990s, young Marty, a resident of Santa Rosa, California, was captivated by the world of ventriloquism. She was an avid fan of Edgar Bergen and his famous ventriloquist dummy, Charlie McCarthy. So when her father stumbled upon a ventriloquist doll at a quaint magic shop on the outskirts of town, he thought it would be the perfect birthday gift for his daughter. The magic shop, nestled in a quiet corner of Santa Rosa, had a curious ambiance. Marty's father, eager to surprise his daughter, purchased the doll without much thought. During the transaction, the cashier, who gave off a peculiar aura, said to him, "You know, when you put your hand inside the doll, he's going to come alive." The comment was brushed off with a chuckle, and the doll was brought home with no further consideration. When Marty received the doll, she was overjoyed. "I was ecstatic," she recalls. "I was obsessed with that doll." However, her excitement quickly turned to unease as bizarre events began to unfold. The doll, despite having a rigid plastic head, seemed to display changes in expression, particularly in its smile, which would shift in unsettling ways. Concerned for her safety, Marty's family decided to store the doll away in a cupboard each night. Yet, their efforts to keep it out of sight did little to quell the disturbances. One night, the family was jolted awake by the sound of pitter-patter footsteps in their living room. Assuming it was the dog or a family member, they went to investigate, only to find the doll sitting on the couch alone. "We always made sure to put it away," Marty explains. "I took great care of that doll, so its sudden reappearance was unnerving." As time went on, the strange occurrences became more frequent. On one occasion, while Marty and her father were out, her uncle, who was alone in the house, heard Marty's father calling his name from the living room. When he checked, he found the doll once again on the couch with no one else in sight. "The doll became a source of fear for our entire family," Marty says. "People started hearing their names being called, and there were noises of footsteps at night." In response to these unsettling events, the family decided it was time to get rid of the doll. Being a deeply religious Mexican family, Marty's parents believed the doll might be harboring something demonic. They attempted to burn it on the grill, but the flames refused to consume it. "This doll would not burn, no matter what we did," Marty describes. Frustrated, they tried to cut it up with a knife, but the blade was ineffective. Finally, they discarded the doll in the trash. To their dismay, when the garbage was collected, the doll reappeared in the trash can. The family decided to bury it in the backyard and cover it with cement, hoping that would be the end of it. Years have passed since the family moved away, but Marty and her relatives still recall the eerie experience. They often wonder if the doll might eventually find one of us, leaving them with a lingering sense of unease about the haunting presence they tried so hard to escape. The tale of the haunted ventriloquist doll remains a chilling reminder of the mysteries that can emerge from seemingly innocent objects and the fear they can instill in those who cross their path. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share the video. See you next time.